Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and the show's coming to you today from our Canary Wharf studios. We'll be answering your property related questions, and helping me do that is Adam Butler, Sales and Marketing Director of Avamore Capital. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Your first show, so
Yes.
We'll try and be easy on you.
That'll be much appreciated.
Good. And joining Adam is Simon Taylor, co-founder of Empty Property Hunters Limited. And we don't need to be easy with you. You know what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. Well, we'll get straight on with the questioning. And Simon, you'll go first. Do the experts think that the time is right for a revival in local authority provision of homes, for example, similar to the creation of larger council estates created in the 50s, 60s and 70s?
Yes and no. It would be my view that as long as they are, the condition being that they've got to be building the right type of product or property that people want. So I don't think it should be identikit inner city apartments of 20 stories and above. I think that's fallen out of favour. But I do think that if the government's wanting to get anywhere near their 1.5 million homes being built, that they can't just be relying on the private sector. Private sector, there's issues. It's not the easiest to get development finance, given the cost of materials, the life cycle of developments, etc. Whereas the government can, well, they're borrowing for themselves, or it's blue chip. It doesn't get better than that. So they can take advantage of borrowing effectively for nothing. And I do think that the capital in the right hand should be deployed to alleviate housing crisis and take more and more people out of the 5-year plus long waiting list for a council home. So I think it would be a real boom for the government. Whoever was in power and action such a thing would, I think, reap the benefit. And of course, it would stimulate the economy across many different streams. So yeah, I think that the government needs to be rolling up its sleeves and bringing development in some respects in-house.
Well, the last time we built all these council estates was sometime after the Second World War, really. It was a recovery period after that. I think the danger today with setting these huge targets for house building and restrictions of money on the councils, because when they sell something, they're not allowed to just automatically reinvest it in homes. We don't want to see a lot of substandard building, do we? That's the issue, I think.
I've seen examples across South America and Europe where it can't just be products or properties built by accountants. It can't be a specification that's shaved to the absolute bone. You want people to feel pride, and in fact, that's got to be encouraged. And I think it can't just be a rush for the cheapest possible tender. I don't necessarily think that's the best use of taxpayers' money. I think a superior product needs to be put in place that's going to last generations. And one thing I will add is, you're right, all these houses, these council estates that were built in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the aftermath of the war, and then all of a sudden 80s and 90s, and a whole chunk of them were sold off, and then we're back to square one. So there can't be that short-termism, and I think whatever flavour of government is in power, these have to stay for public use. This housing, it can't be sold off on short-termism to as a sticking plaster for other endeavours. So that would be my view.
I know your passion is the recycling, if you like, of empty properties and making use of them. Are the councils utilising their full portfolios of properties?
Nowhere near. And we have members of the public sending us in upwards of 1,000 properties they suspect are long-term empty up and down the country. And we're staggered. Our team gets staggered and surprised, shocked, disappointed, is when we see a long-term empty property. The visual signs are there. It's decrepit. It has a look of abandonment. The windows and doors haven't been painted in years. There's weeds growing through the roof and the gutters. And we will do our detective work to ascertain, well, what is the ownership of this property? Maybe we can have a conversation with the owner. And we discover that it's owned by a local authority. So it's so frustrating when we hear stories of long waiting lists for social and affordable housing, and councils may be spending fortunes on emergency housing, which is cost them an arm and a leg, Well, hang on a second. How about we make empty homes part of the national conversation? And how about local authorities utilise the stock that they've got? And if they don't want to utilise the stock, that's fine. Maybe they haven't got the appetite to take on a refurbishment of a couple of hundred homes that they own. Sell them, or sell them to a housing association, or put them into private ownership. But you can't just local authorities shouldn't just be sitting on empty housing stock that they have. And people have asked me, well, why would that be? And I think it's probably it's the usual story of government inefficiencies, people passing the buck, nobody wanting to take responsibility, high churn of staff. And I think, dare I say it, many a local authority is not quite sure exactly what they own and what's actually happening with it.
It's also a question of whether the councils in recent years have employed the professionals that they need. There's a lot of unqualified people in local authority positions.
Well, there's we come across some great people as well in crossing our paths in the world of empty homes. Brilliant people. The sad thing is they're just under-resourced. And quite often you have one person who's looking after or whose jurisdiction is empty homes, or it might be dealing with empty commercial properties. One person cannot be expected to be handling portfolios of 1,000 properties. And many local authorities across counties will have upwards of several hundred long-term empty properties that they're doing nothing with, which is a travesty.
No, the only thing I would add, and completely agree with all those points, I think would just be around more integration rather than segregation if they are going to build this. I think previously, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was more, we'll put all the council housing, new builds here, and actually, if you integrate it with the wider community, you probably have to build at a better standard, like Simon mentioned. If then there's a resale market in the future, it's better location. But I think that, and as I said, design.
Although that has to be balanced. I remember when Ken Livingstone tried to bring in the legislation that said, you've got to have on the same floor in a private development, you've got to have social housing and you've got to have private housing. And of course, the people who are paying £1 million for a flat didn't want somebody who'd been rented a social home next door on the same floor. The integration at that level just doesn't quite work, does it? It
can be, I suppose, certain areas. Certainly, if you look at certain boroughs of London, as a good example. To be fair, maybe it doesn't work as easy. I think, but I think it drives a better quality of build, I think, actually, and that is the key part.
I think you're right on that. What I don't like to see is where you have a development and it's sort of the entrance at the front that's grand and marble and all the rest of it for the private owners, and there's a sort of sub-entrance at the back for the social housing element. I think that's quite disgraceful, really.
Well, and I think come back to Simon's point around, not built by accountants, to be fair, some of the cost and look of these. We then saw further issues with potential sort of cladding remediations from some of these blocks that were built back then, to be fair. And again, even those were done at cost rather than really for the efficiency of it.
Okay. Adam, your question is, with the government's target of 1.5 million new homes seriously falling behind, do the panel put this down to limited development funds being made available, or simply a lack of appetite on the part of developers who are reluctant to develop?
Yeah, I think even using the word target is probably be more aspiration, to be fair, because I think you set a target that's never been achieved, it kind of, without changing anything, how do you expect to do it? That's kind of the definition of insanity, really, isn't it? Keep doing the same thing, expect different results. But I don't think it's one single factor, to be fair. I think there's multiple factors. If you look at the front end, you've still got larger institutions, sort of land banking, holding on to that, which I think, again, is making it difficult for the smaller developers to get hold of some of these sites and build them. You then move into similar frustrations, I guess, with local authorities, just understaffed, like we talked about on the point before, really, that planning applications are taking longer than ever before and feel like there's more and more hurdles to go through. I think that's the first bit that's got to be fixed if we're ever going to even get close to this target. But then you've also got, material costs, delays on sites, workage shortages as well. I think, again, without getting too political, definitely saw post-Brexit probably a reduction in the number of contractors available on site. So for me, there's so many pain points at the moment rather than just development appetite or funding appetite, to be honest with you, I think.
Do you think the government were rather foolish to sort of set that figure?
Yeah, I think it's that. we're going to do this, but what, how? I think that's the point, right? We can all say, I'm going to do this, but it's the why, it's the how behind that. And for me, we're now still looking at the solutions to get us there. We should have been looking at that before we set the target.
Of course,
actually, yeah. I think we're well behind that target. I think again the sort of looking back to building more sort of through the housing association could be a really quick win or a big win to increase that number. But I think also smaller developers, to be honest with you, is another opportunity. If we wait for the large house builders to just get us there, as I say, I think that's not going to work.
I mean, you're right. The large house builders do have land banks, and the government try and discourage that. I'm not sure that's right though, because if you've got a sweet shop, you buy shelves of sweets, don't you? And you don't necessarily sell them all on the same day. You've got to have your stock there. A developer has got to have his land to develop in the future as and when the market makes it sensible to do so.
Yeah, and I think then the reason they are banking a lot of this land is because of all those other more financial constraints. As I say, the costs, the build costs, uncertainty, I'd say, rather than necessarily just rising. I think it's more about the uncertainty, because you've got to be costing, certainly on larger sites, you've got to be costing now for 24, potentially 36, 48 months later. That's been very challenging to do over the last few years. So I think, as I say, for me, the first fix, I think, is the planning. I think if we can get through planning applications quicker, more efficiently, not having to play so much of the game with it a little bit. I know that obviously they targeted, I think, bring on 300 to 350, sort of recruiting, training up. I don't think that even works out to one per local authority. We need far more than that, to be honest.
Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when I'll be asking Simon and Adam more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Adam Butler and Simon Taylor. Simon, your second question. I've had difficulty in selling my home and it's now been on the market for over 12 months. Would the experts recommend selling it at auction rather than through a conventional agent, given that their advice has had no effect so far? Well, I think we've all been through that at times, haven't we? Agents telling us what we need to do.
Many an estate agent, from our experience, will often tell an owner what they want to hear, not necessarily what they need to hear.
Well, until they've got the signature.
Well, exactly. And my commiserations to the person whose home has been in the market for 12 months. But I'm going to be cruel to be kind and say it's time to wake up and smell the coffee, because they're hanging on for a price or an expectation that ain't coming anytime soon. Perhaps they're thinking of, well, I'm going to hang on to the spring and there's talk of interest rates maybe coming down, and then buyers galore are going to appear out of the woodwork, and I think that's probably wishful thinking. This estate agent that's currently maybe is acting for them should be hung, drawn and quartered and fired immediately. And yes, it's time for a change of thinking and a dose of realism. But to your question, should they be sticking with a traditional agent or going to auction? Totally depends on the property. So if it's a twee cottage in a country village, I would say, whoa, no, auction is not the right choice. Stick with a local agent. If it's a suburban semi in a busy city, in a Sheffield or a Leeds or a Manchester, Birmingham, no, I think you're better off with a local agent, particularly if it's a house that's maybe you're attracting the sort of buyer that's going to be involved in the local community. Maybe there's schools nearby. That local expertise from a local, good, skilled local agent is going to give you good, straightforward, honest advice. Should be the course of action. We will choose whether to sell via a local agent or at auction, dependent on the property. So if it's a property that's been fully refurbished and is beautifully done and is going to appeal to a family, we will tend to give it to a local agent. If it's maybe a project or development that we're not going to be taking on ourselves for a variety of reasons, such as geography, and it's rough and ready, we will dispose by auction. So assuming this is probably a homeowner that's maybe been there for a long period of time, I'd probably be steering away from auction, in fact, definitely be steering away from auction and changing to a good reputable agent who's going to give the right advice and is going to tell it as it is rather than telling what you want to hear. And the only other thing I would suggest is to sign an agency agreement with that new agent. Don't be signing an agency agreement that ties you into using that one agent for 6 months plus. But I think a change of agent and freshen up with new photographs, new marketing material is what their property listing, because candidly, after 12 months in the market, it is completely stale and the market is thinking, well, there's obviously something wrong with this property, so it needs a freshen up to rejuvenate the property top to bottom.
Yes. I mean, for those watching the show that have never been involved in selling a property, perhaps for the first time, or because they've just not entered the market yet, it is very difficult. There are a number of agents that will tell you anything that you want to hear to get the instruction, and they will try and tie you up for as long as possible because it just gives them comfort of having a large portfolio to be able to offer. But it's not good practice, because what that agent will find is that he'll have all his negotiators spending most of their time on the phone explaining to clients why they haven't sold their property, and it's not a very clever situation. Mm-hmm. You'll get on as a contrast to that, you'll get an agent who perhaps does that, tells the vendor what they want to hear, and then starts suggesting huge cuts in the price because the market's changed. Well, I think a good tip there is to say to that agent, well, lovely, if you want me to reduce it by £100,000 or whatever the reduction is, then at that new price, show me what I can buy. Show me what you've got on your books that I can buy for that reduced price you're suggesting I sell at. And if those properties are comparable with yours, then, he's probably talking sense. If they're not, if you say, well, I wouldn't buy any of this compared with mine, then there's something wrong with the conversation, isn't there?
I think it's probably a good idea. If there's a conversation needs to be had on price, it's a good idea to sit down with that estate agent who's coming up with that recommendation and asking them to what's the justification. They can't just say the market. You want to see the facts and the figures and the evidence. Well,
for the particular area,
for the area and that particular property, and what that agent is maybe seeing on the ground in terms of other houses that are comparable, similar, that they've sold on the street, round the corner, down the road, that will then have an impact on the value of their property. And candidly, if a property hasn't had a viewing in 2 to 3 weeks, now maybe it's different if it's a slower market in a more rural location. But if you haven't had a viewing for a couple of weeks, you are on the market at the wrong price. And the only other, I say pearls of wisdom, the only other advice I could give would be, don't go with the cheapest estate agent's fee, because if an estate agent can't negotiate a decent fee for themselves, how good are they going to be at negotiating with prospective purchasers that come to the table?
Well, the other thing is that with property being so expensive today, especially in London, the fee is almost inconsequential. If you have a good job being done by an agent, then whether you pay 2.5% really makes no difference whatsoever, does it? If he's going to hit the number for you, that's the key issue. I
don't disagree, but there are many agents that will out there, from my experience, that will try and differentiate themselves purely on fee. We'll do it for 0.2% cheaper. And there are some sellers that will be enticed by that. But I'm on the same wavelength as you. Don't be seduced by a cheap fee agent that's trying to entice you in with cheaper fees, because it's a sign of poor negotiation. And in a tougher market, you need somebody that is skilled at negotiation and can command respect and stand their ground in terms of their fees and say, no, if you want a job done right, this is what you have to pay.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. Okay, Adam, with all the new property legislation coming into play this year, are lenders seeing a significant downturn in applications for finance, particularly in relation to the build-to-let sector? So that's your developer clients, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't say new inquiries, applications have fallen at all, to be honest with you. I think over the more challenging last couple of years, we've had probably less viable schemes. I think, as you've maybe seen, some of the more experienced developers sort of hold firm. We mentioned before about land banking, but actually whether it's land or not, just holding fire, and actually that's given opportunity to those more sort of inexperienced or budding developers coming through, but then maybe not so sure on their costs or how they're going to do it. So seem more unviable. I think you've still seen applications for build to rent increase over the last year. I think planning applications have reduced in 2025. I think you've still seen a lot of again, I mentioned before about the smaller schemes, to be honest with you. I think actually whether that be developers maybe moving into that sort of refurbishment conversion scheme to keep things going as well. But I wouldn't say it's tailed off at all, to be honest with you. I think there's certain challenges we saw again with interest rates. At times it was almost impossible for people to get that long-term buy-to-let mortgage on it once it was built. if they're retaining it. I think we've seen that come down a little bit, and I don't expect to see it probably reduce much further. It probably, will level off now. I don't think a terrible level. It seems fairly fair for the banks and for the clients, really, in terms of the rental stress test. So I wouldn't say it's naturally fallen off, to be honest with you.
Well, that's quite encouraging, because I think the smaller developer is really important, and especially when you're in a capital city like London, for instance. If you get a smaller developer that can just pick on perhaps those brownfield sites, that a small warehouse or factory area that could well do with development, your bigger guys aren't going to touch that. They're not interested. But your smaller developer is going to be key to the regeneration of that particular area, don't you think? What do you think?
Well, totally. So at Empty Property Hunters, we also will buy a select number of commercial properties per annum, and it might be a closed hotel, a former care home, a closed down school, a variety of commercial properties that, yes, the big house builders are not going to touch. And we will try and repurpose them, and quite often join hands with that local investor. Why? Because they've got that local knowledge. They've got that skill set. They will know the teams that can get the job done right. And quite often we're doing joint ventures with local investors for these type of properties, because and I will bang this drum forever, which is just shining a light on empty, underutilized properties, whether it be a house or whether it be a school, a care home, a closed down community hall. They need to be repurposed. That's what community cohesion is all about. And boarded up and broken and left to rot is not good for UK PLC.
Yeah, I mean, listening to you today, and in fact both of you, that it seems that we have all the tools in the box to do the job, don't we? It's whether we can get on and do it, and that comes to you guys financing it, and you guys being able to place it and coordinate the development, I suppose.
Absolutely. We just need to, yes, I suppose there needs to be encouragement across everything from economics to stability in the markets to removal of bureaucracy, but in many respects and aspects that seems to be going the other way. But we roll our sleeves up and fight on regardless. Yeah,
but I also think it shows not just this government, but many governments' inability to think the job through from beginning to end and look at all the different factors that influence these markets. I mean, when they say, oh, well, we'll put the stamp duty up at this particular level, but not that level, it's no good encouraging one part of the market if you don't have a flow through all of it. That's my view. But
very short-term thinking at times, isn't it? Really? Once it's on the manifesto, that's job done. And actually,
well, I should just start. Really. I think that's the feeling, unfortunately, isn't it? But there we are.
No, and the government. If we look at the cabinet, there's nobody has, not one has any practical experience in the private sector in a business setting, so which I think is to our detriment.
I think you're right. Anyway, gentlemen, that's all we've got time for. So a big thank you for coming in today. Adam Butler, Sales and Marketing Director of Avamore Capital. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hope your first show was good for you.
Fantastic, thank you.
And Simon Taylor, co-founder of Empty Property Hunters Limited. Thank you for coming in again.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have your knowledge. Thank you both indeed. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.